Hi, everybody. It's Miss Amber, and I'm here today with your English 11A live lesson. So we're just going to jump right in. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So we finally made it to Unit 2 of this class. So we're starting with the very first lesson, which is the beginnings of Romanticism. I already have slide 5 pulled up. Oh, whoops. Okay, I don't apparently. So what I'm going to do is go over to slide 5. Okay, so I want to start with just the definition of what Romanticism is. There's going to be lessons about the Romantic movement and period and other lessons moving forward in your 11B and 12A classes. And so this is just the start of giving you an idea of what it is. They tell you that the Romantic era began as a movement in Europe in the late 1700s and then spread to the United States. So that's where it began. So it tells you that there's an emphasis on nature and the individual. So by individual, what they mean here is one person and their feelings. A lot of stories up to this point were about groups of people or very specifically about like a family or some organization that was going to do something, things like that. And following the rationalism of the Age of Reason, which happened right before this during the American Revolution, there was an emphasis in terms of what was popular at the time, an emphasis on logic and things like that. So the Romantic era was a response to it. There was a lot of let's prove things, let's construct careful arguments. Literature was basically for making arguments towards proving a point during the time, especially since people were trying to convince American citizens that we needed to be free from Britain and things like that. So by contrast, this was mostly about just the thoughts of one person and not trying to convince a whole group of people or to talk about at large what a country should do or a state should do. It says here that the Romantics rebelled against what they saw as constrained thinking. They celebrated emotion, creativity, and the mystery and grandeur of nature. Many Romantic writers also explored new forms of writing. They often wrote about nature and the everyday experiences of individual men and women. So what they say here about constrained thinking, they're talking about just focus on one specific area of progress. Especially during the American Revolution, there was a lot of focus on just figuring out different ways for philosophy to form like the backbone of what people thought at the time, due to people trying to shape arguments again for being freed from Britain. So the idea is that the Romantics didn't want people to focus on just the black or white of what made sense and what didn't. They wanted to focus on the nebulous or the sort of unsure, undefined, the wavering emotions that everyday people have in their lives. And it says, although it eventually gave way to realism, Romanticism stretched into the 1800s. So realism is a writing movement that happened after this, where people were just sort of obsessed with telling it how it is, describing raw details for people. So this happened after Romanticism. So they're giving you a little bit of information about what follows. So on this slide, they give you the characteristics of Romanticism. So they tell you about some of the notable traits. And I mean, honestly, nature and focus on the individual are the biggest things for Romanticism. If you can remember that and put that in your notes, that's about it. So most of this lesson is going to give you detail on how people went about doing that. So this first sentence starts off with, notable characteristics of Romantic literature include the importance of the individual over society and an appreciation and respect for nature. The theme for the individual versus society can be found in works by Edgar Allan Poe and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So they're basically letting you know that these are two famous writers during the Romantic period. And it says their writings, talking about these two, Poe and Longfellow, could be characterized by a speaker's visceral internal monologues. For example, in Longfellow's poem, My Books, the speaker relates his surroundings to his own feelings. And then they give you an excerpt. This is an example. So I behold these books upon their shelf, my ornaments and arms of other days, not wholly useless, though no longer used, for they remind me of my other self, younger and stronger, and the pleasant ways in which I walked, now clouded and confused. This focus on the individual exemplifies the idea among romantics that a person derives significant meaning from the individual rather than society. While the speaker of the poem comments on the books in his study, his focus is on the memories they bring to mind rather than the importance of the books themselves. So that's pretty much the big example here. I think that this is a perfect example of Romanticism. They're talking about the thoughts and emotions of this one person and how this thing affected them. In this case, it would be books. In this case, it would be books. Instead of going on about how books are important to society, they are significant or something like that. Instead, the focus is on how the books made this person feel. Now, if this was some other era, there probably would have been a paragraph about how these books affected this individual, how books are great for society, or how everyone should spend time reading books or something like that. But it doesn't really help bring attention to the memories, the importance of this one person. The idea of Romanticism is being able to live through and identify with the feelings of others. So here on this slide 7, they give you examples of the focus on nature. So they talk about Henry David Thoreau and Herman Melville. So they focused on nature in their works, and they are also writers from the Romantic period. So they give you an example from Walden, one of Thoreau's books. It says here, Thoreau laments society's influence on the natural world. Alas, how little does the memory of these human inhabitants enhance the beauty of this landscape? I'm not aware that any man has ever built on the spot which I occupy. Deliver me from a city built on the site of a more ancient city, whose materials are ruins, whose gardens cemeteries. The soil is blanched and accursed there. So this excerpt portrays the role of nature in Romanticism. According to Thoreau, humans who seek out to construct beauty actually detract from the beauty of the natural world, is what they're saying. And up here, we've got Romantic writers such as Thoreau and Melville view nature as being far more deserving of time, thought, and attention than anything artificial or man-made. And that's the point that's made in this excerpt here. Thoreau thinks that humans are trying to build beauty with their resources, but they are ignoring the beauty that's already here. And it says, although other characteristics are present in Romantic texts, the focus on the individual and appreciation for nature are the period's most distinctive qualities. So those are the biggest things that you're going to need to remember and to have in your notes from this lesson. Oh, okay. So here we go through several of the different authors. What I will tell you is that most of these entries are pretty short. And I think that the important information for you to write down from these will probably be the year that the poet was born and their works. I think that those are the important things to take out of these paragraphs. So for Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, he was born in 1807 in Maine. I would write down maybe the place. So the place, the year, and his works. So we have Longfellow's famous works include the poems Paul Revere's Ride, The Song of Hiawatha, and Evangeline. He also produced a well-respected translation of Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. So for Nathaniel Hawthorne, he was born in 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts. His first work was Fanshawe. He also wrote several short stories for periodicals, which were later collected and published as Twice Told Tales. So his famous works are The Scarlet Letter, The House of Seven Gables, The Blithedale Romance, and The Marble Fawn. Edgar Allan Poe, he probably doesn't need any introduction. Most people have heard of him, even if they haven't read anything that he's written. He was born in Boston. That would also be Massachusetts. They didn't include the state name because it was mentioned earlier. He was born in 1809. He published himself anonymously at first. It was a collection of poems called Tamerlane and Other Poems. And his other notable poems include Lenore, The Raven, Ulalume, Eureka, a prose poem, and Annabel Lee. And then they go into some of his novels and short stories from the horror and mystery genres. So some of his well-known short stories include The Fall of the House of Usher, Murders in Rue Morgue, The Mask of the Red Death, The Black Cat, The Telltale Heart, and The Purloined Letter. And then they tell you his only complete novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, is the last one. Poe was also a literary critic. Henry David Thoreau was born in 1817 in Concord, Massachusetts. So one of the things I would add to your notes about him is he was one of the first Americans to champion a simple and self-sufficient way of life. That means simple meaning easy, not complicated, and self-sufficient meaning that you should be able to take care of yourself. He thought that that was the ideal life for Americans, for everyone to sort of live on their own, harvest their own food and take care of themselves, make their own things, that kind of stuff. He was also a strong abolitionist, so that means that he was opposed to or against slavery. So I would put those two details in there about him as well. Then they give you his famous works, Resistance to Civil Government, Civil Disobedience, Slavery in Massachusetts, A Plea for Captain John Brown, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, Walden and Maine Woods. And then lastly, we have Herman Melville. He was born in 1819 in New York City. His first work was a travel log called Typee, and it was about Polynesian life. But that was the only real success that he had. His later works include Moby Dick, Bartleby, The Scrivener, and Billy Budd. So I think that most people know him for Moby Dick, but he was not famous for that book in his lifetime. Oh, they also give you a fun fact here at the end. In fact, Moby Dick's opening line, "Call me Ishmael," is considered one of the most famous lines in American literature, and that is true. So now that we are into the second section, we are talking about different ways that you can narrate things. There's a video on the next slide that you can watch that'll give you a little more information, but they talk about the 3 different modes of narration. So here, authors can choose to communicate their stories through first person. That's when you're talking about yourself. I went to the store. I went to explore the cave. Those are my shoes. That's first person. Second person is when the story is talking to you. If you open up a book and it's like a choose your own adventure, like for those of you who might know the scary goosebumps types of books, those are second person, where the book is telling you, we'll flip to page 54 to see what happens when you open the door. The book is talking to you. They're talking about you and your things and your reactions. So that's second person. And then we have third person. There are 3 different types of third person points of view, which are reviewed in the video. And I will go over all of them really quickly. So there are 3 types. The 3 types are called limited, omniscient, and objective. And there is actually, I think, a English concept summary on these. I think that there's actually a cheat sheet on what these are. So let me see if I can find it really quickly. Nope, not here. There's the video. Here's the cheat sheet. Again, just as a reminder, this is from the English resource course. The English concept summaries are in the resource course. If you are a step-up student and you need access to this document so you can save it and take a look at the links that are there, you can ask your advocate to give you the link. You can also contact the English department at the english@atsedu.net email, and we can attach the file for you so that you can download it, or we can send you the link so you can access it on your computer. But this is the cheat sheet for author's point of view. And I'm going to scroll down to third person point of view so we can go over this. So here they start with third person omniscient. In this point of view, the narrator, the outside narrator, can know and share everything about the characters and events in the story. This knowledge includes all of the thoughts, feelings, and actions that may relate to the characters and events in the story. Here are more details about that third person omniscient point of view. So it uses he, she, it, and they, just like all the other third person points of view. They give you an example. Clara was upset that she missed the school bus, but Juan knew that she would recover quickly. So they're giving you Clara's feelings, and they're telling you that Juan knows her well enough to know that she's going to recover. And then they give you a book example so that you can look that up if you need to. The second one, third person limited. It says, in this point of view, the outside narrator is able to see into the mind of one character from the story. The narrator can tell the readers everything that character observes, and there are more details about it below. So it uses the same pronouns, he, she, it, and they. But the difference here is you're limited to all the thoughts and feelings of one person instead of everyone. So they give you the example. Clara was exhausted from her run to the bus and wondered what Juan thought about her being late. So because Clara can't possibly know what Juan thinks, and we only know what Clara thinks in third person limited, we're limited to her point of view. All we know is that she's wondering what Juan thought of them being late. We can't say for certain what Juan feels like we could in the other example because we don't know and Clara doesn't know. So then the last one is third person objective. In this point of view, the outside narrator is completely detached from the story. So they're telling the story the same way that you would tell someone a story based on what you know. So say you're outside and you see a fight happen. You don't know what's in the minds of the two people that are fighting. You don't know what's in the minds of the people who rush up to take photos or to try to help out or pull them apart. What you could do if you were, for example, telling your mother about it is just say what you saw, what you heard, and what you felt. So that's third person objective. The difference between third person limited and third person objective is that if we have third person limited, we get the thoughts and feelings of the one character that we are focused on. And third person objective, the narrator is outside of everything. So all they can tell us is what they see and hear. So they are completely detached from the story. It can tell readers only about the actions and dialogue. So that's what people do and what people say that are observable. So things that you can see and hear. Here are more details about objective point of view. The example that they give you is Clara ran across the street to the bus stop while Juan watched from the corner. That's all we know. We are just telling other people what we saw and heard, and that's it. So third person omniscient is when you know everything. Third person limited is when you know everything about one person, sometimes two people, but usually one person. And third person objective is when you don't know anything, but you're trying to explain to someone else what you saw or heard happen. And this video pretty much summarizes all of that. So take time to make sure that you watch it, because there might be some keywords you want to put in your notes about those 3 points of view. Okay, so here we're starting to get ready for the selection, the reading selection. We have Rip Van Winkle. So we get to learn about the author first. The author is Washington Irving, and we learn about his career as a lawyer, but he preferred writing. He published the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon between 1819 and 1820, which included essays and short stories like Rip Van Winkle. He's also the author of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So if you've heard of that, it's been turned into a movie several times. They've done different adaptations of it. So those are the sort of things that he wrote. He also wrote The Letters of Jonathan Oldstyle, Gent, which was a series of letters satirizing the culture of New York. So satirizing is making fun of or providing insight through making fun of. And he wrote lots of letters to various friends and colleagues and things like that. So this is where they actually give you the reading for Rip Van Winkle. There's going to be a summary of the story on the next slide, and I'll comb over it a little bit, but as you know, I don't, go through the readings line by line, as there's not quite enough time. If you need help with the reading, once you open it, if you think the language is too complicated or you're not sure if you'll understand what it's saying, be sure to book an appointment with a tutor. But in this slide, they tell you about just encountering new vocabulary. This shouldn't be new to you at this point. If you've been with us for a while, or even if this is your first class, I'm sure that you know that there are a lot of different types of words that you come across in these lessons. And they just talk about the importance of actually looking up the word's definition so that you know what's being said in the text instead of guessing. That's something that a lot of students do on tests, and it doesn't help. Just take the second to open a new tab and try to look up the vocabulary word. If there is something that you're not sure about in the tutorial, what you can do is open up the dictionary right here and look it up. So this slide gives you basically a summary of the story. So I'm just going to read these 2 sections really quick and not the examples, because I still want you guys to go back and read the selection before coming here. Basically, the story of Rip Van Winkle shows the effect of change in America after the Revolution. So Rip lives in a village that's under British rule. He's a well-known and well-loved man by his community, but he decides that he doesn't really like how things are. So he goes into a forest nearby where he lives and ends up falling asleep under some like magical circumstances, some supernatural circumstances. And he doesn't wake up for 20 years. So once he wakes up and goes back to the village, this is after the revolution. So things are very different. They're not under British rule anymore. They are dealing with the effects of the revolution and how the aftermath of that has affected people. So he's treated as a stranger because, it's been 20 years and pretty distrusted at first. And when he comes back, he finds out that most of the conversation that people are having in the village is centered around politics, and that people feel your politics determines what sort of person you are. So the world is just very different than what he knew. And the point of this story is to compare how America was before the revolution and after the revolution through using Rip Van Winkle's slumber as like the breaking point to compare and contrast. The important thing about this story, though, is that it's a good example of romanticism in literature. So it's a good example of how the Romantics valued nature. Rip does not enjoy living in villages with people. He does not like civilized life in the village, and that's what causes him to leave to stroll into the forest anyway. He goes into the mountains and he decides he would rather stay there. And there is a lot of strong positive language for nature and the area around the village. And that's what they give you the example of here. The mountains are described as both beautiful and mysterious. They set the scene for Rip's experience of waking up 20 years in the future. And this last section here actually is just focusing on language. So they give you a bunch of vocabulary here. They start off with avarice. They give you the pronunciation, the definition, and other parts of speech. So just like with the other lessons that we've gone through together, I think it's important for you to at least get the word and part of speech since it's there, and then get the definition in your notes. The other parts of speech you might not need. I think that it's easier to understand the other parts of speech once you actually remember these words. Then they also give you some information about relative clauses. It says here, relative clauses are dependent clauses that modify a noun or a noun phrase. So I want to remind you guys, in case you're not sure, a clause is a section of a sentence that contains a subject and a verb. So there are two types of clauses. There are independent clauses, which could be a sentence on their own. And then there's dependent clauses. Dependent clauses need other information in the sentence for it to be a full sentence. If it can be a sentence on its own, it's called an independent clause. So there are different types of dependent clauses. Remember, these are the sections of sentence. Remember, they have a subject and a verb that do not make a full sentence on their own. So relative clauses are a type of dependent clause. And it says here they are a type of dependent clause that modify, that remember that's a fancy word for change, a noun or a noun phrase. So remember, a noun is a person, place, or thing. So that means that a noun phrase is a phrase that describes a person, place, or thing. So there are two types of relative clauses, restrictive and non-restrictive. So we've got sort of like a branch thing happening here. We've got clauses, two types. So like clauses, and then there are two types. If we were to branch this out, there's dependent and independent. So under the dependent umbrella, we have the relative clauses, and there are two types of relative clauses, restrictive and non-restrictive. It says here the purpose of a restrictive clause or an essential clause. So remember, essential means necessary, you need it. So that gives you a hint of what type of clause it is right there. The purpose of a restrictive clause or an essential clause is to further define something in a sentence. If a restrictive clause is removed, it changes the core meaning of the sentence. So that's why it's essential, because if you remove it, it changes the definition of the sentence. So they give you an example of this. It says, it needed but a glance with the peculiar expression that his face often wore to change the roses of her cheek into a death-like paleness. So they use the word that to make this clause a relative clause that tells you about the expression. It's not just any expression. It is the expression that his face often wore to change the roses of her cheeks, so you mean like a blush, into a death-like paleness. It says the clause is essential for understanding the meaning of the sentence. Yes. It's not like an expression can be anything. Like you can express things with your words. You can express things with your face, like wearing an actual facial expression. That's why it's called facial expression, because you're specifically saying, hey, this is an expression that is on my face. You could also have an expression of your personality or clothing. So they're letting you know that it's not just any type of expression. it's an expression on his face that affects this woman's face from blushing to being pale. If you remove the part that says that his face often wore, you don't get the same meaning because you don't know what type of expression it is that is scaring the woman or that makes her look more serious. So it says a non-restrictive clause or non-essential clause, so that means not important, not necessary, describes a non-defining characteristic of the noun or noun phrase that it modifies. This clause is usually separated from the rest of the sentence by commas and is non-essential to the sentence. So it says, for example, Nathaniel Hawthorne could have written his sentence in this way. It needed but a glance with the peculiar expression which his face often wore. So they used which this time, and they separated it with commas to change the roses of her cheek into a death-like paleness. So what you're saying by adding it with commas instead of attaching it directly to the word expression, you're telling the reader that they don't need to know the information is about his face if you were to write it this way. So the difference between a non-restrictive clause and a restrictive clause is that you're communicating to the person reading that either those details are attached to a specific noun because you need it to be viewed that way, or you're telling them if you separate it with commas, it's just to the side, it's just some extra detail. So you would pick what type of clause you would use based on how important that information is to what you're saying. Okay, and I think that's about it for this lesson. Yep. Okay. It looks like it logged me out there because it's been a little while. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Alrighty, this was a pretty short lesson. They just wanted to give you an idea of what romantic writing is like. There are other lessons that will be in classes coming up past this one that will give you details, more in-depth details on the Romantic era and how those characteristics affected writing. So if you have notes on this, what I can tell you for sure is that these are going to be notes that you'll want to keep for future classes, just in case you make it to the English 12 courses, because the Romantic era pops up again and it influences other stages of writing. But yeah, this was a pretty short one, pretty simple. The Romantics are, in fact, just about nature and individual thoughts. Some of the lessons on the side about point of view and the restrictive clauses will help you when you are writing things to decide what details are important, maybe which way you want to write a story for an essay or an assignment that comes up later on. And that's about it. So just as a reminder, if you have any quick questions about this lesson or any other lesson, you can feel free to email the MVA English email, which is english@atsedu.net. If you need help with understanding the writing, the lesson activities where you have to do writing, or the reading selection for Rip Van Winkle, please, 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 guys, please schedule a tutoring session with a tutor so that they can sit with you and go over the reading selection if you need it. But other than that, this is Miss Amber signing off, and I wish you good luck with the rest of your English class.